All right, we might get underway. I would like to introduce Graeme Wilson, VK7RE, and VK5WX Whiskey X-ray. Yeah, I thought it was weather.
So I've had 11 call signs in my life.
There you go. There's an interesting story to go along with Graeme. Came along a couple of 3 or 4 months ago. August. So yeah, okay. And he said, "Oh, I think you know Phil Patterson." And I went, "Yeah." And now Phil did some legal work for us when I was in the WIA. He happened to, and he lived in Waterworks Road. Visited him a few times, and it's just around the corner. And Graeme said, "Oh, I'm renting his house off of him. He's moved to Canberra." So it just goes to show that it's a very small place. Very small place. And I think you met Phil in the RAAF, yeah. So anyway, I'll let Graeme introduce himself. So go for it.
Okay, now I've had a long life, about longer than that. I've done a lot of things. Now, 2007, October 2007, I scored a job driving all over Australia checking mobile phone coverage for a company called Crown Castle, which is now called Axicom. Now, in 2007, when I started, Crown Castle had something like 28,000 mobile phone sites, as in towers, or what we generically call a pole, whether it's a tower, a pole or a site. They had 28,000 of them, and they were literally landlords. So if you wanted to put up a cell site or a two-way radio site, you'd go to them and they would, you'd just do a business deal, and it's a big rent, but what they needed to do then, I gave up working in 2014, they have to verify what the customer's gear is doing and prove that they've got certain radiation patterns and certain signal strengths and so forth. So I was employed as a drive trial tech, and this is like 3 of us started up in one day. That guy there is still working for them from 13 odd years. This guy lasted 10 months. That was my boss. Now, he was 28 and I was 56, so he was the same age as my daughter. So I'm taking instruction from someone half my age, and that was their boss in the background. Now, they'd previously done limited tests where they'd just get uni students, hire a Commodore, thrash it for 6 weeks during the vacation, come back, check all the data and make decisions. It was called business intelligence, and so they're finding out not only what Vodafone was doing but what everyone else was doing, Telstra, Optus and so forth. So we had to verify that. Now, this is actually, that photo was taken the day this guy here stopped. This is 10 months afterwards. Now, Telstra had that map going there. That was NextG. That was done about 2008. Nothing to do with us. It's already done by Telstra. And that's the sort of thing that we were checking. And that's just the Northern Territory. Now, when I first started driving, we might want to turn this thing off. Now, we didn't have any kind of an instruction manual or any real idea of what to do and how to do it. It was just go out there and figure it out. And I was pretty nervous to begin with. Now that there is about a month's, certain period of time in New South Wales. And then the next one, this here is where the story starts. That's northern Victoria, that's Shepparton here, and Albury's over here somewhere, Wodonga is over there. Now, this particular morning, and I think that was the 20th of December 2007, so I'd been working for 2.5 months. I came out of Shepparton in the morning, drove down here, drove past the tower, and I thought, well, there's other roads. What should I do? What could I do? What can I do? So I've gone around some of the back roads and I've come back to the road that I was supposed to be on, because we were given maps with bold lines. Follow these lines. Now, I didn't complete that. I didn't go back. And I've gone on a bit further and I've done these 2 triangles. And then I've come along here and I've done this open-ended rectangle. Yet I've missed that bit there. And I'm thinking, should I be doing this? Should I be going back? What should I be doing? And how can you drive and not go over a road twice? This is the whole crux of it. How can you not go over a road twice? It's almost impossible. Now, I did a little bit more and then I went up here. I've done another open-ended rectangle there, and that's the start of all the thought on efficient driving. As in, how can you do this job efficiently? Now, mathematically, if you're on a 2-dimensional surface, you almost cannot do 3 sides of a triangle or 4 sides of a square. You've got to cover one leg twice. So then the whole thing starts to come down to, how do you drive efficiently? And there's a lot of thought, like preparation the night before you do your drive. Sitting there, you've got the TV going, ad breaks come on, you look at the maps and you start figuring out little patterns and you memorise these patterns. So this was the first car that they gave me, and that's actually the day that I gave it back. I put 192,000 K in 18 months on that car, and then the accountants took it off me and gave me another one. Now, it had some fairly simplistic bit of gear. That's called a Camarco. It only picked up around the 900 meg and 1800 or so meg, because it was only 3G back then. Now, it also had, you can see there's a power cable for 12 volts, there's a GPS input there, and a USB going back to a laptop that would sit on the front passenger seat. Now, I don't know what the sampling rate was on that thing. It wasn't very reliable. There were times when it would take me 15 minutes and multiple retries to get the thing to start and to stay working. So, and it was no good complaining, because I'm sitting out in the middle of nowhere, got to get this thing going. So you just got to keep on shutting it down, restart till it worked, and keep an eye on the laptop and see that it was still working. Now, just had 2 simplistic aerials, mobile phone type aerials there, plus the GPS, which with the magnetic mounts and bases. Now, the second car, or third car I should say, because when I handed that car back, I picked up one of the other cars that we'd got, because we started off with 3 cars and one guy left after 10 months. So his car sat under head office for another 10 months. So I finished its contract off, and then we got a Subaru Outback and put this in. That's in the left rear passenger seat. We took the bottom of the seat out because it just wouldn't fit any other way, and it's all bolted to the frame of the car. Now, the bit that did the most work was this bit at the top. Now, ignore this thing here. You see that? Right, ignore that thing for the time being. This thing here was the brains. That would pick up every mobile phone channel 20 times a second. And that wasn't at its limit. They just decided, 20 times a second will be enough. I don't know what the upper limit was. Now, I never figured out for certain what this was. This thing here was, I suppose, a GPS tracker. But because it was only operating on 2G, and 2G was becoming non-existent, there were big gaps. Like, I could be in Lismore and it would say that I was still at Brisbane Airport. So we replaced it with something else eventually. Now, that's it there, that's out of focus, don't worry about the focus there. And that's the way it sat in the car. I carried a printer around with me all the time, a couple of boxes of necessary stuff. I would spend 10 days on, 4 days off. But we originally started out at like 5 days on plus the weekend off. But because you spend a day driving or travelling home and a day getting back to work, you only had 3 effective days. And so the other guy and I decided, look, 10 days on, 4 days off is fine. And that's the way we ran it. It was fine by us, fine by head office. Now, that one eventually became that one. So you can see the top bit of gear is still there. Now the bottom device had a number of mobile phones in it. And what it would do, because we had SIM cards for Telstra, Optus and Vodafone, and this thing would automatically ring up another similar piece of gear in head office in Chatswood in Sydney, and it would have a recorded voice going through it with the same message day in, day out, and about every 3 minutes it would be calling up, and it would be doing a quality test, because there's only something like 80% of what you say into a mobile phone actually gets out the other end. So these things were fully automatic. Once you started them up, they just went by themselves, and the gear in the server room at head office worked out the quality. It knew where we were by the GPS. That all went through, and would do quality tests. Worked real well until one point Vodafone, like the Vodafone phone, just stopped working, and we thought, what's going on here? And we've paid the bill because it was a monthly account. Bills were all paid, and a day and a half later, we've finally figured out from the people at Vodafone that making 3,000 phone calls a month is not fair use. And then we had to explain to them and educate them that this equipment works automatically and it's testing the gear, your gear, on our sites. And so after a day and a half, the thing started working again, and we didn't have any more trouble. Now you can see there I've got 2 spare tyres, because that gear on the left there is all bolted to the floor. So I took the tyre out, and I knew from the previous driving around Western Australia, you've got to have 2 spares. And that stuff would overheat, and this was at the end of 2012 or 2013 in Adelaide, 46 degrees, the air conditioner, just the cool air wasn't getting down the back, and all the stuff was suffering. It'd be just failing under heat, doing its automatic shutdowns to protect itself. I got a little 12 volt fan, it sat there, it never moved, wasn't strapped down or anything. So it blew a bit more air in, and I took one of the panels out so there'd be a little bit of fresh air get in there, but the ventilation was poor. Now, when I got the 4th car, I did the installation myself. So this is part of the back of a Subaru Outback. Taking all the panelling off, it's very, very easy to get the coaxes in from the antennas on the roof in through where the indicators come out. And so that's where the cables went there. You can see 2 aerials there on that side, and then on the other side was almost the same. Well, they just dropped down behind all the panelling there. There's no hard work trying to get any cables anywhere, and that's the same on the other side. It's very easy to fit. Now, they gave us some maps, and the maps were A0. And I don't know what A0 is. It's about this big by this big. I folded one up in the car completely one day and never did it again. So you can see the patterns where I've driven. I've used the different coloured felt pen to highlight where I have been every day. So that's 3 days driving there. So you've got green, blue, orange. There's also a pink. Now the reason that I used separate colours was because if we lost data for a day, and that happened, like a hard drive failure, I'd have to know where I had been, so that I could do what we lost. And I even got to the point of indicating on one side of the black line where I'd been, so that I knew what direction I'd gone, up or down. So this is all part of the developing of the techniques. So we had suburban driving. The vast majority of what I did was suburban driving, more than 90% of it. Now 10% would be remote and rural. That was my favourite. I just loved it being out in the bush. But that's not where the money is. And I do 2 city centres a year, and you only do them on Sunday morning, because that's when you got the least number of people. Now Perth was the first one I did on a Sunday morning, and it's deserted. There's just homeless people and taxi drivers, and that's it, right? Melbourne's the exact opposite. You've got everyone out on their bicycle, riding around, getting in the way, having their cappuccinos and so forth. So like you can do a city centre in 4 to 6 hours. Now, this here is Perth. I've started here from the motel. I've driven out, joined this road here, driven down to here, and now you see the GPS trace has gone haywire. And that's the first time I'd noticed it. And that's because I'm driving down through the glass canyons, and you've got metallised film on all the glass. So the GPS distortion, like I was amazed, and just driving along looking at the laptop where I should be looking at the road, I missed my turn to the right, so I've had to go further and turn around, come back, and then find somewhere to take a photo of that, because I was so not impressed with what would be the word, intrigued by this. Now, with the early gear, the Camarco, I'd be driving around, and if the GPS wasn't picking up properly or well enough, it would give a warning, an audible warning. GPS lost lock or something like that. And what I found was that if you go anywhere near pine trees, like your pine plantations, the GPS just won't get through. You'd be forever getting this warning, GPS lost lock. So
is this with the trees very close to you?
Yeah, pine trees.
Even though you can see the sky on the road?
Yeah. Yeah, that one is Melbourne. So there's a fair bit of distortion. And even if you see this little kink here, I pulled up and parked the car because I needed to trot down to the toilet. I came back and did the rest of the job. And then when I've taken the photo and I've looked at it afterwards, the car was stationary, but the GPS has moved, or it says that the car's moved. So this is the sort of thing you've got to be aware of with the GPS. Now, this is a place called Collie over in Western Australia. That was a very good signal. This is a very good representation of your mobile phone coverage. Now, up here, the cell site was around here somewhere. I never saw it. The blue is the strongest signal, then your green, your yellow and your red, or your orange and your red. Red is fail. Now, this area here is a little bit of a hill. So all of this is downhill and it's obscured from the cell site. And it doesn't take much to obscure these signals, whether they be 800, 900 meg or 1800 meg. That's Adelaide. Now, the reason I took that photo is we had a failure. I've done 3.5 hours drive there and it's just suddenly stopped. So because I'm looking at the thing every 5-10 seconds or so to see that it's still working, and it had a failure. I've taken a photo, shut the entire thing down, and it's like an 11-minute cycle from shutting down all the gear, the laptop, everything down to switched off and then restart, and continued on. So I've done North Adelaide. There's another time it just went haywire. Does that show okay? Yeah. Just every second it's just gone ping, 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 ping. and it's usually heat that does it. And that was a fairly efficient drive. I was proud of that one. And now this is Brisbane. That is Brisbane. That's how much distortion there is in the GPS trace by driving around Brisbane. Most of that's straight roads. Like, that's a curvy road there. It's followed that okay, but all of this here is straight. And you see how much the massive distortion. And that was a particularly efficient drive. That, like that one there, I almost didn't drive a road twice. So I was real proud of that. Now, because we were often in contact with each other and discussing how to do drives, and the other driver and I decided we needed a GPS with a lot of waypoints, because the GPS that we had one waypoint, which is not much use. So we pestered the boss, 28-year-old boss, and he finally got these Garmin top of the line GPSs with about 10,000 waypoints in them. So we could sit there in the night before, watching TV, and then during the ads, figure out our plot, where we wanted to drive. Now, I did that for half a day and just stopped using it, because this super expensive, super intelligent Garmin GPS could not understand why you wanted to do a U-turn. Now, if you go down a cul-de-sac or an O3 road, you've got to do a U-turn and come back. And the GPS would go, you haven't got to the waypoint. Like, you could not get to a waypoint even if you sat on it. You had to be almost millimetre perfect. And it would just say recalculating, and it wouldn't take you to the next waypoint, it would take you to the final waypoint. So I used it for about 4 hours and stopped. Now the other guy continued to use it and persevere with it. And I went back to using the map. Now if you see here, what looks like a bit of trash there, that's the map. The A0 map all folded up. And my earplugs, whole box of Bunnings earplugs there. So I used to drive around with earplugs in all the time, because I'm deaf in my right ear from all the driving I've done. Now, Western Victoria, 2010. Now, Eastern Victoria 2009 had the Gippsland Fires, where 140 something people died. And one of the outcomes of the investigation was people couldn't get mobile phone coverage. And so there's a lot of pressure put on politicians through Canberra and so forth to get some mobile phone cell sites out there. Now, a mobile phone cell site like that is only about $250,000. They wouldn't make, would that be about right? And they wouldn't make $20 a day. But the thing is, in an emergency, now what price is an emergency? If someone has a heart attack, stroke, or a tractor accident, cut their leg off, motorbike accident, whatever, you've got to call the ambulance. And because every person is worth about $2 million to the economy, to the government. So if a person dies, it sets the economy back to about $800,000. Now, Optus and Vodafone are public companies, so they have to make a profit. And they produce a profit and give it to their shareholders. Now, Telstra is stuck carrying the can for Australia, as in they have to have sites out in remote areas that are not profitable for this simple service of police, ambulance, fire brigade, lifeline, whatever. You've got to have this stuff out there. Now, 2010, I found 11 sites under construction that didn't have any gear, like towers weren't fully built, or they didn't have any antennas, coax, anything working. I just happened to stumble on them by driving around there. And my job was then to just go and take photos, and we figure things out. Now, it's pretty obvious that's a Telstra site. You can see the recent earthworks, the Telstra optic fibre signs, and then taking photos like this, that all goes back to head office, and the engineers look at it and they say, well, we know what that structure is, how long it is, how many sections there are, how tall the thing is going to be when it's finished. and because that's the first lot of photos I ever took. It's the first one I ever found. So I didn't really cover it properly. This is the second one. So I'm doing a better job. I didn't go up there and get the phone number off the door of the green hut, but they could see they've got 3 towers that are going to be, so it's going to be a certain height. Got the location. You can see there's a Telstra exchange across the road, so it's obviously a Telstra site. Now this one here, I drove all over Thredbo and I couldn't find the site. It's one of ours, and I could not find it. Backwards and forwards, up and down, left, right, everywhere, and the signal always peaked here. And then I suddenly thought, well, it's inside this sign, and it's in the back of that the wooden structure there. Now if you have a closer look, you'll see there's 2 doors and 4 padlocks. So that's where it is. Now the other thing that I only realised 2 nights ago when I was looking at this photo is if we go to here, you see that little white cone, that's the Telstra GPS antenna. So every Telstra site's got that because they've got GPS disciplined oscillators instead of the rubidium standards. Now this thing here, I drove past it, I went and did a whole suburb, came back, and what I saw was this green hut. And I thought, what is that green hut doing there on its own? And so I stopped and had a closer look, and then I suddenly realised that's a mobile phone tower. And we'll just go back there. Now, that's a big piece of pipe with some antennas at the top hidden in there. Now if we expand this, the exciting thing is, now can you see black dots? It's a beehive. So if anyone had to work on it, they'd have that to think about. So that's actually beside the Calder Highway, so you can see a bit of bitumen road there. It's at Sunbury in northwestern Melbourne. Now over in WA, driving along, saw this site, had to drive right around it, and I realised that the property that tower was on was for sale. So I took the photo, got the details, got straight onto head office. They made the phone calls, or made the decision, do we try and buy it or do we try and get a section of it that the tower is on, the mast is on, and they decided no. But that's like, you find these things, you photograph them, you get the details, it's someone else's decision. You give it to someone else to decide. Now this one, similar thing, in Western Sydney somewhere. That's actually a Telstra site. Because if you don't know, like almost every Telstra mobile phone site does not have dishes. They're almost entirely connected by optic fibre. It's only your Vodafone and Optus that are still using microwave links. So find the details, find the address, the streets, and then send it to head office. Now this was another one back in Victoria that I've did a bit more thoroughly.
Okay, so not sure that we...
Got all the details. This time I got a photo of the door. Now every one of those green huts
On the other circles.
has that sign, and they've got a phone number. And the phone number tells you who the company is that owns it. Now, I never memorised them, never found out, didn't care. Just take the photo, give it to head office, so they know whose site this is going to be. So it's a 3-sided structure, certain amount of hardware there. So again, head office engineers will go, it's going to be a certain height, have something on top of it. It'll have 3-phase power. That's the sort of thing I was doing. Now, every site will also have a sign similar to this. Now, RFNSA is RF National Site Archive.com.au is actually owned by ACMA. So acma.gov.au have rfnsa.com.au. Now, on that site, I suppose you've got to have usernames and passwords to find out the details, but you can find out the details of every site because they've got a site number and so forth. So you should be able to work out what frequencies they're on, what channels they're using, and so forth. Now, going back to 2008, 7-8, when I started, the deal was that they had 18 months to put the information in there, and almost everyone waited 18 months to put the information in there so they weren't giving away their secrets. So they're being forced to say what frequencies they're on, what channels and so forth they're on. That's a site archive.
Excuse me, Graeme, I'm still a little bit confused as to why the company that you work for might be interested in buying the site, unless it was just to get rental money out of the... So it was kind of like, I mean, you were doing work to determine the coverage
Yep.
in these areas, but this was like, oh, this is a bit of an added bonus that
Yep.
we discover this information, and it's a
No,
business
to buy,
opportunity?
yeah,
Is
to have
that-
the site, to own the site.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, to buy them, because the whole thing is to increase. Are we recording? Can we just turn that off for a moment?
You put your hand over.
$28,000 a year rent for each site.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity.
Yeah. So if you've got a $250,000 site, 28,000, that's better than 10% return.
Oh,
That's why your phone bills are so high.
Worthwhile.
This is another one I just stumbled on. It's under construction, it's erected, and there's no antennas or coax. Just saw it, took the photos, took the details. Now, this is somewhere out near Jellyfish Creek in North Queensland. That tower on the bottom is one of the original microwave towers that was put in the late 60s, early 70s. And there's a mobile phone tower sticking on top of it because it's so flat out there. The other thing about that region is the heat shimmer in the afternoon. And quite often, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they'd lose contact because of the heat shimmer. Now, the first bit of optic fibre that went into Queensland went in there, Jellyfish Creek to Cloncurry. And the reason it was done there, well, to get a consistent link through there, but air traffic control from Brisbane and air traffic control in Darwin have a phone that they just pick up and start talking to each other. They don't dial, and it goes, it's a straight through line, and they needed to have 24/7 guaranteed coverage, and that's why the optic fibre went in when it was first brought into Queensland. It wasn't the first bit in Australia, but the first bit they got to put in there. Now, that's in Adelaide, and that actually turned out to be a Crown Castle site because there's 2 huts at the bottom. Had me fooled. I didn't pick it straight away. And when you look at the other trees in the area, palm trees all around, blended in very well. And there's not coconut trees, but palm trees in Ulladulla. Like apparently Ulladulla, New South Wales, there's no visible cell sites. It's all hidden. Now that one there almost went past it. It's in the Faulkner Cemetery in northern Melbourne, and I spotted that tiny little yellow square, and I thought that looks like an RF hazard warning sign. Had a closer look, and I thought that's got to be a mobile phone cell site. Went and had a good look at it. Now the cable run is under the ground. It must have been there for some time because you can't tell where they've routed the cable, and it's more than 100 metres over to the cabinets. So that's a very long run under the ground. And then we have other interesting things that we get to see along the way. One of my favourite places. You know who designed it? Barnes Wallace.
Okay.
Ring a bell?
Yeah. The bomb.
Yep, bouncing bomb. Now he also designed the Halifax. And when you look at a picture of the Halifax without fabric in the back of this thing, you can see the same sort of triangulation. Now he designed the original design and someone flattened it. They've shifted the the receiver chamber out. Now that's all liquid helium cooled, as in they run liquid nitrogen up one of the legs, and there's a fridge cooling gear up there, so that's at 4 Celsius, 4 Kelvins or whatever. Now there's 2 different antenna setups here. You see a set of wires, and you'll see them better there. I never found out what that was. I presume it was the Jupiter experiments, where people were listening at 20 megs to the noises coming from Jupiter. There's an old horn in the background there that's been inactive ever since I've seen it. It's been sitting there for 40 years or more. I don't know what frequency they were looking at. I'd say it's around 400 megs, just going by the aperture there on where the feed would go. But I'd originally thought that it was for hydrogen hyperfine line, but that'd be a much smaller aperture. That's the console, the replica console that was used in the movie The Dish. That's Australia Telescope at Narrabri. There's 5 dishes. There's one of them out of sight. It's on a rower line. They can move them at any time. It's got a very interesting visitors information centre. No one there. Like, you just walk around and read things. I don't know whether any of this actually moves. I wonder if this thing here is tracking the sun. I only thought of that 2 nights ago. That it's roughly looking in the direction of the sun. That thing there, if you see the shadow cast by the reflector, is it active? Is it tracking the sun? Don't know, because they did a lot of solar noise experiments there. This thing here is just for people so they could talk at a dish and hear someone else at the other dish. These things here are derelict. There's 96 of them, or there were 96 of them, in a big circle. You can see it quite well on Google Earth. Now, why they designed the dish like that, I'll never know, because that's not a parabolic dish. It is 8 flat triangles. And they all reflect back to a circularly polarised log periodic. So
it's probably parabolic. It's just that if you a fairly low frequency, you don't have to have a perfect parabola on each segment.
Yeah.
But the segments as a whole would still act as a parabola at that frequency, which probably is only about 200 megs at the bottom, at the highest frequency.
Maybe 500 at the top, yeah. So they didn't rotate as we would expect. They just followed the sun. That tyre was 2 weeks old, driving around in Western Australia.
What?
Yeah, just chewed to bits. Now, driving around in the mining country, there's a lot of iron ore. Massive amounts of iron ore. Now, an estimate was done years ago that if the entire world's supply of iron ore came from the Pilbara, it would last 1,500 years. Now, because 2008 was boom time, and they graded the roads a lot, and that's the worst thing you can do to a dirt road, is to grade it and snap off a stone. So I was getting, like the first car I had the 32 flat tyres in 16 months. And a lot of them were slow leaks. They'd go down overnight, so you'd find it the next morning. After, first job was to get that tyre repaired. Now, we're off subject here. How many Cortina fans have we got here? Me? What's interesting about this one?
2-door.
2-door. I never knew they made a 2-door. And this is just the things that you see. I don't know what the story on this thing is.
Jetson.
Something homemade. It was just cast aside. That's outside the Golden Circle pineapple cannery in Brisbane. Just derelict, left out in the rain to rot. It's been shifted. It's now someone's garden ornament. That's one of the most northern suburbs of Canberra, just as you go out of the ACT. Now, Great Australian Bight. Would that be an inversion? As I'm getting older, I'm getting more interested in history, and I've become very interested in early explorers, and that's Ernest Giles' grave in Kilgady. And I left him a bottle of water. So I'm about 130 years late. Yeah, but it's the thought that counts.
Are you
Now,
a fan of nanner nanner?
eh?
Are you a fan of saying nanner nanner?
No. Never watched the program. Now, back in, it was the 4th of January 2008, I set fire to Victoria. Now, what I wanted to do, was to get a photo of that cell site over there. There's a mast there. Now, I tried to figure out how am I going to get up the hill to get a better photo. So I came in here, drove up here, and as I'm driving up this hill, I'm thinking to myself, because I can't see what's over the front of the car, I'm thinking if someone else comes up the other side, we're going to run into each other. So as soon as I got onto the flat ground there, I've just pulled over to the right, the handbrake on, put the transmission in park, and I've looked, and I thought I blew a radiator hose. That was my first thought. Brand new car, and I've blown the radiator hose because I thought it was steam, it was smoke. I've set fire to the grass from the catalytic converter. And because the Subaru Forester's got 2 fans, and it was 38 degrees or so at the time, and so I've started the fire, and I've opened the door, and I could hear the snap crackle pop, and there's this fire that's 2 metres long already by 1 metre wide, so I've just slammed the door, got it into drive, handbrake off, got off the fire, got out of the car, straight into the back, got the 1 kilo fire extinguisher, which is utterly hopeless if you want to put out a fire. Did everything correctly. I pulled the pin and walked around it correctly, and they only last 5 seconds. I would have needed about 8 seconds to put the thing out, and it just ran out of puff, dry powder, and even though I had bottles of water and soft drink, I still wouldn't have been able to put out the fire, and I got straight onto 000, and the only thing I didn't do by reflex, the only thing I intelligently thought of was don't use my own personal phone, give away my personal phone number. I used the company phone. Because even if you have a private number, 000 know who you are. And nowadays, like this is 2008, so it wouldn't have been a problem, but nowadays you've got voice prints. And if you've ever been on the dole lately, signing up for it, you've got to talk in and repeat a sentence, so they get a voice print, so they know who you are. If you make prank calls, they know who you are. So anyway, I started a fire. Now literally from the moment that I parked the car, pulled the handbrake on, to when I was dialing 000, would have been 15 seconds. It was that quick. Now, I'm a Queenslander, born and bred up in North Queensland, and all we have up there are cyclones. Now, a cyclone, you get 5 days notice. So if you're going to procrastinate, you've got to put all the rubbish away, and that you can do it tomorrow or the next day, she'll be right. Here, you start a fire and people come running. And because I dialed 000, and from what I remember of it, you don't know where these people are that you're talking to. They just go, police, ambulance, fire brigade, what service do you require? I said, fire brigade. So what state are you in? Victoria. Whereabouts are you? Bonnie Doon. Whereabouts exactly are you? I don't know. So I didn't have a clue. I'm going, well, I'm so far from the bridge, and then I discovered over to the left, this way, was a cemetery. So the person I was talking to must have pulled up Google Earth because she figured out where I was once I said cemetery. And then I just got off the hill and parked the car in a safe place, and then 3 or 4 minutes later along comes one of the fire brigades, the volunteer fire service, in this old 1950s Bedford truck with 5 older people, all our age, and I'm thinking, as I saw them arrive, I'm thinking there's going to be 5 heart attacks here this afternoon if they're going to be trying to drag hoses up the hill. And all they did, I just put the thing in low range 4-wheel drive and just chugged up the hill and fought the fire from the back of the truck. And a couple of minutes later another fire truck came in, and they've obviously coordinated via radio. So one was fighting from this end, one was fighting from that end. A few minutes later along comes the chief in his own personal Land Cruiser ute with 1,000 litres of water in the back, and what he's done, he's gone down a pathway to a gate, which is just out of the picture. Well, it's out of the picture. He's got out of the car, got a key, and opened the lock. So they've obviously got a master lock and a master key system. And he's gone along the inside and fought the fire from the inside of the property, and that fire didn't go through the fence. So they've turned the opportunity, or taken the opportunity to turn a fire into a controlled burn. Now, the 2 things I had going in my favour was there's no wind, and it's at the top of a hill. Because the fire at the top of the hill moves very slowly. If it's at the bottom of the hill going up the hill, it'll go fast. So anyway, after the two fire trucks had turned up, I'd actually thought there were 5 fire trucks turned up, but it wasn't, it was 2, because they went away to get more water. And they've come back with the sirens on, lights flashing and so forth. Now, the other thing that was very polished, and polished, not the right word, very well practiced. People were turning up in personal vehicles, like husband and wife, Toyota Hilux, big tool tray on the back. Husband gets out, straight into the toolbox, wife slides across the seat into the driver's position. Guy gets his fireproof clothes, his hose and his rakes and so forth, jumps off. Wife takes the 4-wheel drive 200 yards away and parks and waits, so that she's not in the way, or the vehicle's not in the way or in any danger. And there's a couple of them did that. Like they've just turned up and they're straight into it. And along comes this Nissan Patrol towing a big trailer. And as it's going past, very slowly, it's got Elvis heavy lift firefighting helicopter ground support equipment on the side of it. And I'm thinking, what a coincidence. This thing's just going past at the right time. No, they've called them up straight away. Even though they didn't get the helicopter in, they were ready to call the helicopter in, and because this is right beside Lake Eildon, so there's no shortage of water. So if this thing had got out of control, they would have got the chopper in straight away, but they were just having fun doing a controlled burn. And anyway, after all this happens, along comes the local copper, and he pulls up, and because I'm standing beside the road waiting to give a statement, and he says, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh, there's a fire on the hill, I started it." Now, he never said a word. He's just, you could read the text across his forehead, what he was thinking. You started a fire and you're still here to talk about it. So anyway, I had to stay there and give 2 statements, showed them the fire extinguisher. They didn't say anything. I said, "What's going to happen now?" And they just go, "No." So, "Do I need to make a contribution? I'll give you 2 44-gallon drums of diesel." "No." "What do I do now?" So I did. Disappeared, and I come back the next day to take the photos. So, now, where do you have mobile phone coverage? Are you able to watch Sky TV on the edge of the Nullarbor Plain? Yep. And that was 19th of January 2008.
Some places.
Some places, not every
There's
place.
Big gaps.
Big gaps. They've improved it because all the gaps, they've got all old 3G stuff and shifted it. Yeah, because all that from Eucla over to Norseman is all 3G, or it was the last time I went over there. So they filled in the gaps with the, not obsolete stuff, but all the older stuff where they replaced it with 4G stuff. Now the maps had heavy black lines, and they said, follow these heavy black lines, go there and check this coverage. So one of the heavy black lines was the road to Israelite Bay, which is over near Esperance. And I got 2 kilometres down there, and I just thought, I don't think this is wise. So I reversed 2 kilometres and had a sore neck for about 2 days from looking over my shoulder trying to reverse. Take the opportunity to take photos of silly things like that. Now the West Australians are really into roadside art, and that's one of the best ones. So that there, as I say, I'm into early explorers. He was Lieutenant James Cook when he landed there. That's at a place called the Town of 1770, or Agnes Waters in central Queensland. That is the Omega Tower at Yarram in Victoria. Now that's all been brought down very unwisely, I thought. How many of you have ever seen it? Okay, the tower doesn't radiate. It's the 16 radials that radiate. Now one of them is fed. Now this hut here is the antenna tuning unit, and they had a set pattern of on a certain frequency for a certain period of time, and then they go off, the relays click over, and they retune to another frequency, so they're hopping over in a set pattern. There were 8 stations around the world, and they just did that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now this thing would excite one radial. That radial went up to meet a common circular thing up there to excite the other 15. Now all this VLF stuff, if you've never had anything to do with it, what they do is they excite the D layer, and the D layer becomes a waveguide. So that's that. You can't see anything there, much the same. Hard to see wires. Now, what do you reckon this thing here is? This heap of stuff just sitting out in the weather. Can you see it there?
Which state are you in?
Canberra.
Yeah.
Recognising it?
Left over from Woomera, isn't it?
No. That's a piece of it, sitting on a pallet on its own. It's a V2.
Oh, okay.
Sitting there going rusty. Now the V1 and the V2 were made from steel because they couldn't afford aluminium. And that thing was just left there. It was originally covered in black plastic. You can still see some of it there. And the last time I went through Canberra, it had been shifted. Now when I lived in Canberra for 8 years. I got there in 2003 and I went up to that annex. This is at a suburb called Mitchell. So it's all part of the War Memorial. I knocked on the door and I tried to volunteer. You know, very enthusiastic. No, it's all right. We got enough volunteers. See you later. So I left. Never went back. Turning down volunteers. I don't know whether there's 32 or 33. That's on the road to Mount Dookie near Shepparton. Because all that area is so flat. They've put the TV station on the highest bit of ground around, which is not a very big hill either. Now the silly thing about it is that that's only going to keep cars out, because just out of the picture about 5 metres away was a set of steps, so you could just walk across the fence. Now, this is in VK3 land, somewhere near Kyneton. I don't know what the guy's call sign is.
Mike Oscar.
Yeah, Mike Oscar, yeah.
That's-
VK3MR.
Okay, that's 20 metres, 4 phased antennas, rotating mast. It's one of my favourite areas. Now, you notice we're really off the subject here, yellow paint on the side of the road. It's only in the Kosciuszko National Park for snow, obviously for snow. I've never seen anywhere else in Australia where you got yellow painted lines, as in recent years. They used to do it back in the 60s. You know, fires went through there, I'm not sure what year, but all of that to me is standing fuel. They're all dead, those trees. You know, the thing about a gum tree, well, we're really off the subject. Thing about a gum tree, when it gets burnt, if it's really burnt and the top of the tree dies, the tree regrows from the base. And that's why you'll often see gum trees that are 2, 3, 4 trunks, because they've grown from a couple of different places. This is Lake Yukonbean, pretty dry. On the way back over to WA again. Now that apparently, I've just learned tonight, is a wind finding radar.
WF2.
WF2, everyone else knows about it except me. Hey?
So Hillpie ticket was WF1 and WF2. Rex knows about these. And their original purpose in life was sort of just after the war, they were going to use them as a guidance system to talk planes into airports.
Yeah.
But the approach systems for aircraft improved, and so then they put them to use tracking weather balloons.
Right. This is at Esperance at the Skylab museum, or the museum, and about a third of it's dedicated to Skylab junk, space junk. Now, a lot of the stuff survived the entry, and from what I saw, I reckon anything that had thermal insulation had a fair chance of survival. Now, back in 1994, I got to talk to one of the guys at the Balladonia Roadhouse, and I asked him, like he was part of the family, it's a family that owned the place. I said, did you see the thing coming down? He said, no, we couldn't see it, we could hear it. And it made a lot of roaring noises and cracking noises and tearing noises as it's all being torn to pieces, but they never saw any of it. So it didn't come down as a fireball at all. So there's a door, bits of thermal insulation, that's some sort of a pressurised vessel. A lot of the electronics that survived, they had a technique for building stuff, what they called cordwood. Because this thing was made in the mid-70s or early 70s, where they didn't use printed circuit boards. They literally had wires in a 3D, like resistors would be standing up and transistors would be upside down, and they're all hardwired and they're just bogged in araldite. No printed circuit board. And a lot of that survived. A lot of the F111 stuff's like that too. That was the freezer, came down almost intact. More thermal insulation. The pathway, the expected pathway. Now, have you ever seen a plant with triangular leaves? There's one. In a place called the Fitzgerald Biosphere. The place is just amazing. It's between Esperance, well, it's around Esperance. And I've been there and I've hopped out of the car and I've looked at the ground, and you stand there long enough, you'll see things that you never thought were there. I remember looking at a complete plant that's about a half an inch long, and it had a little red flower about the size of a redhead match. That's how small it was. And the sand, I don't know whether that's silica or whether it's one of the calcium sands. Very bright, very white. And the thing, there's sand dunes. This is at Bremer Bay. The thing about all that bottom of WA is the colour of the water, the white sand and the blue water. Incredible to see. So someone there with a lot of patience. That's what happened to the railway line at Meckering during the earthquake, 1968. Now apparently it happened on a Monday, fortunately on a public holiday, because the primary school literally collapsed, and because no kids were there, so no one got hurt. But virtually the entire school came down, and a lot of the other houses were severely damaged. The water pipe, this is the 30-inch water pipe that goes from Perth to Kalgoorlie. They painted two different sections, different colours. It just telescoped like that. Water went everywhere. That's a replica of what a lot of people came home to. That's where the earthquake happened, looking in one direction, because the farmers have just levelled the whole thing off and just continued farming. They don't want to lose any land. And that's in the other direction. So the Meckering earthquake, you can't see anything that's left of it. They're having a bit of trouble with salt over there. It's Australia's smallest bank. Now this guy's a ham. I'm pretty sure this was Meckering. I've been there 3 times and he's never been home. So I don't know who it is. I'd say that's 20 metres. 6 metres, 2 metres, 160. I'd say that's a top-loaded vertical. Now, what's unusual about this place?
Go, please.
How many of them have you seen lately?
0.
Yeah, and that one's still there. A place called Coolin. That's out near Wave Rock. Now, Wave Rock would probably be the hardest place, the most out of the way place. If you're ever going to tour around WA, it's worth seeing. It's a long way to go and a long way to come back.
It's only 4.5 hours out of Perth.
Yeah. Now, driving along, this is beside an old railway line. There's a derelict section of telegraph line. And both ends, like it's about 5 kilometres long. Both ends were down. And it's just been left there. So, a single wire telegraph line.
Great beverage.
And again, roadside art. And I've got 100 photos, and that'd only be half of what was out there. They really get into this around that area, around Wave Rock. But you'd be stopping every couple of 100 metres looking at things. Now this thing fooled me. I thought it was real. It's a fiberglass replica. Non-flying. It's in Perth at a place called Bullsbrook, and it's the Air Force Association, their headquarters there. They've got a museum. I've driven around this thing twice, the 2 times I've been over there. Didn't realise there was a museum. They've got a Lancaster inside there, plus a lot of other stuff. I missed it. Now, by special invite, I got into Tidbinbilla. This person here on the right is our long VK1RX. I don't know, never knew who that guy was, but he works there. Now this thing here, I'll show you the next picture. We'll go back for a moment. There's no electronics above ground. As in no low noise amplifier, it's all underground. And what they've done, if you can imagine, so they've got the dish, they've got the sub-reflector, and there's an entry point up here. It's a big pipe. Now that's a 45-degree reflector over to here, which is another 45-degree reflector, down to here, another 45-degree reflector, and another one here. So there's 4 reflectors, and eventually, because it's a rotating joint, and it's got to be able to handle every direction that the antenna goes. So the signal ends up going underground to the low noise amplifier plate. And that there is the big dish. That's a 70 metre dish. That's what they call DSS 43. It's number 43 in the NASA Deep Space Tracking Network. That's the one that they use. There's only 3 this big in the world. There's here at Tidbinbilla, which is Canberra. There's one in Madrid and one at Fort Goldstone in the States. And they track the Voyagers or Pioneers, whatever they are, that have gone way out of the solar system. Now, over here on our left, that dish there is the actual dish that was used at Honeysuckle Creek. And when you saw the video of Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon, that's the dish it went through. Even though Parkes had the signal, and Goldstone had the signal, the thing is, the video camera, you probably all know the story, the video camera was mounted upside down because they saved 1.5 ounces in the bracket. That's why they mounted it upside down. So they would invert the signal at Earth. Now the story is the guys at Goldstone got the signal and they didn't understand the thing was upside down. And one of the Aussie techs at Honeysuckle Creek just goes, oh, upside down, click, threw the switch and inverted the signal. And then when NASA saw a recognisable signal, they patched it through and that went to air. Even though Parkes had the signal, a lot of other places had the signal. And they never changed because once they had the signal and the signal to noise ratio was okay, they left it, wouldn't touch anything, which is probably a wise move. So again, dish 43. One of the other dishes there. Now these sub-reflectors are a nightmare to align because they're 5-axis. You've got X, Y, Z, and then your 245 degree other thing is I got involved in aligning a dish over in Geraldton in WA in '92, and we went for 2 weeks and never got the thing in spec, and then we just left it and continued on with what we had to do. And then after I'd gone, I spent a month there, and the guys brought in some gear from Tidbinbilla. It was a laser, and they would have fired it up the waveguide and hit the reflector and done their patterns, and it took them one night to align it. Where we'd gone, I was there for 2 weeks, and the guys had been there for a week and a half before I got there, and hadn't been able to get the thing in spec. So I'm not a fan of sub-reflectors. Now, this is 137 megs for tracking one weather satellite. Now, I never figured out why there's a 3-element Yagi there off the side of it, and that all got put up for auction or tender, and it's all gone. It was right at the gate as you drive up to Tidbinbilla to the Visitors Information Centre. It's all gone now. And that again is that dish from Honeysuckle Creek. Dish 43 again. I don't know how many tonnes that is. That dish I worked on at Geraldton, the antenna weighed 90 tonnes. And one of the engineers called out to me. I was in the Alidad room. He said, can you stop it from moving? And I hit the emergency stop. And you could hear this thing going rock, 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 rock. Never did it again. Now, things you see. Northcliffe is over in southwest WA. This old chappie here's got a homemade contraption. He'd been down to the shop and got something, and he's just put some wood in there and started the fire again to get the thing to go. So he's waiting for the thing to come up to temperature before he could go home. So not what you'd call OH&S safe. It's 2 pistons, I think. Pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah. Watching TV at Cape d'Entrecasteaux, French name. Right at the bottom of WA, near the bottom. Earthquake. 1979 earthquake. That's all that's left of this one. There were 4 splits, and this one's just full of black ants. What do you reckon that is? Or was?
Ouch.
This is a bit of a driver deterrent shock tactic.
Yep. This is a letterbox.
Oh mine.
That's another one. It's a barbecue. Now, a place called Shell Beach on the way to Monkey Mire. Now, I'd done an estimate before I went there as to whether I would get signal, because it's 42 kilometres to the transmitter site at Monkey Mire. This is Shell Beach. 2/3 of it's across water. So I was watching Sky News there on my mobile, but it was marginal. It was just there, because if I moved the phone away, lost it. So,
That's the one place around Australia where there's always pink on Hepburn,
on,
on
Oh,
the
yeah.
Hepburn charts.
Yep.
All round from Port Hedland up
Yep.
to
yep.
Brew.
So, around there, Shark Bay, there are 1,800 dolphins that live there. There's a half a dozen come in to meet the people. The only ones that come in are females. There's never been a male dolphin come in. Sometimes they bring in pups with them, and the rangers pick the people to give the fish to feed. The pelicans are always hanging around making a nuisance after the free fish. Some of the roads out there's not many, but they use them as emergency landing strips for RFDS. That was, yep, Tony flat on the bottom.
Still in one piece.
Yeah. They're harmless, these things. They live in spinifex.
There's a pretty South Australian floral emblem.
Yep. Now, if you're out there driving and the coppers are driving on the wrong side of the road flashing their lights at you, what it means is get off the road and get your camera out, because there's something big coming. And they're moving, like 70, 80 kilometres an hour. I don't know how many tonnes that is. That's like truck. They've taken the tray off it. We never saw the trays, but two different trucks. That's backwards. Big Komatsus. Now, that is iron ore. You got some of the richest iron ore, highest quality iron ore in the world over there in the Pilbara.
It's all going rusty.
Yeah. So you can see this stuff here that's been broken. It's 62% iron. Now, this train here, it's about 2 kilometres long, and the last 3 carriages were empty. And I thought to myself, why wouldn't you just unhook them? But what they do, they know when the ship is coming in, they know the capacity of the ship. They put a certain amount of rock, gravel, iron ore in this train that will fit in the empty ship to fill it. That railway line is almost all downhill. So once they get the thing moving, they've got momentum, they just keep moving, and they pull into wherever they're going, Port Hedland. I think there's 3 different sites, loading sites at Port Hedland. and they get down to about 4 kilometres an hour, and the bottoms of the carriages open up, all the ore falls out onto conveyors, goes straight onto the ship. Very efficient. There's no double movement, because if you stockpile, what you've done is you've lifted tonnage and put it on a pile, and then at some stage you have to then pick it back up again and put it on a conveyor and put it into a ship. Now, the big advantage with iron ore, you can keep working when it's raining. It's the opposite with coal. When it rains, look, coal is always under clay. When it rains, clay gets wet and boggy, so they all have to park up. So with the coal mines, they make big stockpiles. They've got no other option. But iron ore, they don't have to worry about that. And one of the other big tricks is they chew a mountain to pieces. That way they're drilling to put the explosives in the side of the mountain, they blow it, and it all cracks up and disintegrates as it's falling. So that's done part of the crushing. Then they just got to crush it up. That's all crushed up to about half inch by half inch or so size like gravel. That's it there. That's not the entire train. There's more of it off to the side. Another RFDS strip. Now this is Tower 0 at Learmonth, Exmouth. They call it Tower 0, but Tower 0 is the one in the middle, and there's a total of 13. So there's 12 other towers holding up the antenna array. It's not a map. The Earth is the map. Now that runs anywhere from 14 to 28 kilohertz. It's in a swamp, as in a salt flat. It's tidal. The tide comes in, goes over the ground map. I've spoken to someone who's been to the top of the centre tower there, and he reckons the thing just does not move. Even in a cyclone, they reckon there's no movement. It's so rigidly tied together.
Is the one on the left-hand side, our left-hand side, your right-hand side, the centre array?
That one.
Yeah, that one.
Yep.
It's 10 mil.
Those horizontal bits in it are similar to the 150-foot towers we had down
It looks
south.
like an RFS 10 and delta antenna. So it must be
Yeah.
steerable by all the other.
No, it's just a capacity held up the terrain.
It's just the capacity had it at
Oh, they're just supporting the capacity.
kilowatts.
Okay, right, okay.
They're a bit over, the tallest one's a bit over 1,000 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. Now the
So it's on the direction.
And it's got horizontal bits.
The array is over here. You've got a little hill here with a lighthouse. Now this, I'll give you a disc back in 2014 with all this on it, because I reckon that going from here you can go straight through to a place called Cape Levesque. You got straight over the ocean. It's 1,104 kilometres, because I thought it was 1,204, but 1,104 kilometres. And I would have thought that would be an ideal place to do your UHF experiments, because that's where the Hepburn is at its best, off the West Australian
It's
coast.
not long enough anymore though.
No. So,
You've broken the records.
That's
Whereabouts
it
was
there.
that point, sorry?
Which one?
The one you showed before, the southern point?
It's Exmouth.
It's Exmouth, okay,
Yeah.
so Exmouth to Cape Levesque, okay.
So that's what happens when the tide comes in. And I'll let you read the story. So this
That's normal.
diagram here of this six-pointed star, that's the array imaged over Sydney. As in that there would be Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Opera House. So that's how big the thing is. Now there must be 720 ground radials, because they're every half a degree.
I have problems with my Stratocore or something like that.
There's one in
Now, Another thing I stumbled on.
V2.
Does that ring any bells?
Great, okay.
And that's the original wharf, what's left of it, where they left from and came back to. You worked it out? Wolfe Creek, meteorite crater. I slept there in the tent. I've seen the movie.
Yeah, likewise.
Didn't worry me in the least.
Many times. It's a great place.
Yeah?
I went into the middle and lay down for an afternoon. I'm still here.
Yeah?
How big's the diameter? And how high are the surrounds?
It's the second biggest in the world. There's one bigger in Arizona.
Meteor crater.
So would that be like a kilometre across?
Not quite.
I can't remember.
No, it wouldn't be.
Takes a while to walk.
So
Around,
the
but
sides would
across.
be what, maybe 50 metres high, isn't it?
Something like that.
That's a massive hole.
Because I thought to myself, because I was planning this long in advance, I thought I'll be able to stand on the top of the rim and be able to call my boss through the cell site at Balgo, which is an Aboriginal reserve way off to the south, about 90k. And I'm hoping that I could get that just like for bragging rights. The battery was flat. So, hadn't even thought about charging it. That is a speed bump on the way back in. Like that's going in and out of Wolfe Creek meteorite crater. You do 60 kilometres an hour over that, you get airborne. Then you slow down. This is getting up to Kununurra. They call that the Argyle Crossing. It was laid down sometime in the 1920s, and they used empty 44-gallon drums for pipes, and they just laid concrete over it. And over a period of time, all those drums have gone rusty, and they've all collapsed inwards, become very jagged, and 1 or 2 people a year die by swimming upstream and getting sucked into the holes. Now, I'd say that they must have closed them off since I was there. I worked here in 1975. There's no water coming out of the holes, so I would say that they blocked off the upstream inlets. Now this here, if there's ever sacred ground for a white person, this is for me. That there is sacred ground, because in 1975 I started working there with surveyors, and 3 of the 5 important things that happened in my life started there. The understanding of surveying, which became navigating, because I was in the Air Force as a radio tech and I worked on navigation gear, and all my knowledge came from here. Now the second thing was photography, because with us when we worked there, we only spent 6 weeks there, but one of the other guys was a botanist, a government botanist, and he had to follow us around and take photos, and he had a macro lens, and I was just amazed that he could take photos an inch by an inch and a half, of little leaves or insects or whatever. And that's where I got my interest in photography. And the other thing was radio, and that's where my radio career started, here, using walkie-talkies. In 1975, the bottom of the sunspot cycle, and we could hear voices. We could hear other people talking. There were Asians that you couldn't understand. There were Americans that you could understand. There were people rounding up cattle, and you couldn't see any of them. You did not have a clue where they were. And that was part of the intrigue. And then 1977, when I moved to Alice Springs, I got into the CB radio, which became ham radio, which became Air Force, which became MyTech, which became a redundancy. So my radio career went for 17 years, literally, well, more than that, 20 years now. The interest started at the end of 75 and it stopped at 9:25 a.m. on the 1st of December 1995 when I got made redundant. I haven't touched the radio since. which is another story. But that there to me is sacred ground. Now, we had a campsite. We established a campsite, which is still in use, because now there's a concrete causeway there, a concrete boat ramp. Now, when we pulled up the first day, the boss said to me, get that tin of deodorant, 4-gallon drum of deodorant, poison, sprinkle it around the trees, and it'll keep the ants away. So I just took the cap off it and I walked around and I've just glugged all this deodorant around the base of about 15 trees. Came back, put the lid back on it. I said, that's done. And he said, did you just spray that, just tip that out neat? I went, yeah. He said, did you read the instructions? I went, no. He said, read the instructions. So I went, dilute 400 to 1 with water, which is like 1 pint in a 44-gallon drum. So I don't know if there's still any ants there. Yeah, that is the top dam, Lake Argyle. The majority of that lake you can't see. You don't see much, but it's 9 times bigger than Sydney Harbour. One of my favourite places. It is really stark, really impressive when you go up there. Every one of those rocks is laid by hand, as in they had flying foxes, which is cables, ropes and so forth, and they would put a rock down and people would be there, 2, 3, 4 people would be there with crowbars, and they would reposition every rock. So the bottom of it is at 55 metres above sea level, no, actually 50. 50 AHD, which is Australian height datum, which means above sea level, above high tide. And they've finally got the hydro power station in there, very controversial, it's Pacific Hydro. Now the Argyle diamond mine, which is now shut down, were running diesel generators. And the big push was on to use renewable, use hydro. So they set this up, they put the power lines through to the Argyle diamond mine, and the bill was greater than if they were using diesels, and they weren't impressed. And if you know the history of the Argyle diamond mine, discovered by a woman, because they'd been finding little bits of diamond in the creeks for almost 100 years, or no, since 1900, and around the early 70s, mid-70s, people were out seriously looking. They were looking for the kind of rock formation. They were looking for kimberlite, and it's not a kimberlite site, it's another name that's similar. And the woman that found it, the geologist, was a woman by the name of Maureen Muggeridge, who's only lived to be 62 years old. She died from cancer. But she tracked the thing down. She walked up every creek she could find, and they found it. And then Alan Bond owned it for a while. Anyway, get back to the subject. That's welcome to the Northern Territory. Don't do over 130.
I think it's 110 now.
Yeah?
Yeah, the only 130s on the Stewart Highway. The
From
cross highways are 110.
Yeah. Because when I went up there, that was 2008. Now, coming out of Darwin, I was in a line of traffic, and there's an old combi up the front, and I'm just doing whatever 90. And we're on a big left-hand curve going up a hill. So this 19-year-old girl in a Nissan Pulsar goes, wow, straight past all of us into the face of oncoming traffic. So I always thought that 130 from Darwin down to Katherine was not a good idea. You had too many, firstly cattle right on the edge of the road, and just too many vehicles that couldn't do that speed. You know, too many hippie vans. Now, this was a tidal river. The tide was coming in. This guy would not take any notice of all the fishos that were there that know the area. They're telling him not to go, just to wait 1 hour and it'll be gone. He just plunged in, not taking any advice from anyone. It's a concrete causeway, and because he's drunk, he hasn't understood that the water's coming upstream. So he's gone to the upstream side of the causeway got too close to it, gone over the edge.
Oops.
Couldn't go
And it's
backwards or
salt water
forwards.
too.
Yep. And
Righties.
28 crocodiles in that area. Now, they were very lucky that as they had done that, these two park rangers, women, come to the rescue in that boat, and that's an Aboriginal woman operating the boat, and she was like driving that thing like she's controlling a feather. And so she's just gone around there and put the boat up beside there, and they've all got out. And that's the fool of a driver. Took them over there, they got out, and that's the name of the river. Now, Sir Charles Todd Memorial. It's on the Stewart Highway. I stop and look at things like this and read all that sort of thing. That's one of the original poles, but it's not the original location, because the original location is about a mile off to one side, so they've replicated that. Also, Charles Todd got knighted. He was the person that insisted that post offices and so forth will do weather records. He insisted on it. That's why we have such a good recording system. Another story there. It's 9 o'clock. We're getting too late. It was about 84 tyres or 86 tyres. Yeah. Now, this thing here, I can't pronounce the name of the place. It's an Aboriginal place. I presume it's a shortwave radio, like ABC, shortwave radio site. Was. And that there is a conical monopole.
There used to be one.
That's what
on
used to
this
be out
side.
here.
Yeah?
That's what used to be out here
Oh, so this is nothing new.
in the compound.
The concrete patch is still there.
Really? And there's another one I found at Mount Garnet up in North Queensland, but I was trying to catch a plane and I just flew straight past it, didn't look sideways other than to see it. So I take it this is nothing new to you guys. This is at the Barclay Homestead petrol station. Okay, let's just go through this at 100 miles an hour. You see this scrub turkey? The feathers are vertical. The feathers at the back are vertical. That's what's unique about them. Mossman Gorge, fire vine, and a wait a while. I grabbed one of those when I was about 10 years old, and I stepped on one same day, bare feet. Now, separate to that, you see these two fronds? They've got teeth on them. That's what they call a wait a while. You walk into that and it'll grab you. And if you keep walking, it'll either tear your skin or tear your shirt. You've got to grab it, pull it away and stick it somewhere else. Now this is the stinging tree. You all heard of it? You know about it? It's not deadly. You walk into it and you'll have the greatest pain you've ever experienced. My dad walked into a clump of that when I was a kid. First we knew about it, we got a phone call from the Atherton Hospital saying your father's self-admitted into hospital because he walked into stinging tree. He went and sat in a creek for an hour trying to numb the pain, and then he got back to the car and drove to Atherton. Now, the guy that mentored me into ham radio, Ted Goldridge, dead now, VK5WX, he used to work at the Narrabri tea plantation, and there was an Aborigine guy there, and he said to this guy, what is the cure for the stinging tree? And the Aborigine guy goes, no cure. No cure. And then a bit later he goes, wait, time. It's the only cure. Now, what this tree does, it's a bush, not a tree. The roots are able to dissolve sand and bring the sand up under the leaf, and they make a fine hair. Now that hair, they put a poison inside the hair capsule, and you rub that on your skin, it gets in there, and that, now, we're an electrochemical device, humans, right? You do that, and there's the nerves generate a chemical, and they pass a message on all the way to your brain. What this does, it's got the synthetic version of whatever that chemical is, and you get a massive overdose. You get a huge hit, which causes pain. Now, what is there? There's nothing there. And it's exactly the same sense as you eat a chili and you think that the chili is hot. It's not hot. It's at room temperature when you eat it. It causes a lot of pain in your mouth. The stinging tree does something similar. It's different chemicals. Now there's up in those regions you've got a thing called the box jellyfish, which does very much the same thing. The tentacles get on you, it puts a little capsule into your skin and causes massive pain, and they can be fatal. So that's what the leaf looks like. I almost walked into one of those once when I was out walking with my dad. He saw it, he pulled me up. There would have been about 15 bushes. I would have been in serious trouble. Now, you don't feed the wildlife. So that's me giving it a piece of sausage roll. Millimilla Falls. This is all up from where I come from. Wallerman Falls, it's almost 1,000 feet. 2 base jumpers have died jumping off there, so it's 0 out of 2. You know what the term base jumping stands for, the BASE? It's building, antenna, span, which is bridge. Bridge starts with B, so does building. So they've used the word span, and E is earth. So that there would be earth. So they've got to achieve the 4 jumps to be a base jumper. Now, Cooktown, Grassy Hill, where Lieutenant Cook stood studying the reefs when he could see them, trying to figure out how he's going to get back out from the Endeavour River there, out away from all that coral reef, because they spent 6 weeks there, 3 weeks fixing the boat and 3 weeks waiting for the weather, for the wind to come off the land. So that's Cooktown, what's left of it. There's a roaring town in the gold rush. Now, what do you believe? I believe that sign. I believed every bit of that when I took it, because it's supposedly an extract from Cook's journals, and I've found Cook's journals online. You can see them. They've got photos of every page, and there's not one word there that's the same. The dates are wrong. Now, what I believed, you see the word here, Indian?
Yeah.
I actually believed from 2008 until earlier this year that he used the term Indian. Never did. It was native. So, there must have been a wireless station there back about 1913. And also the legendary story of the kangaroo was first sighted by Europeans, because Cook, they came here, everyone thinks they came here with one boat. They had 3 boats, 3 sailing boats altogether, plus a rowing boat. And they had a horse, they had a pig, 2 greyhounds. Now, what we're taught at school, that Cook landed in 4 places. Landed almost every day, because Joseph Banks wanted to look at all the plants. So almost every day they were on land. Now, they never saw a kangaroo, supposedly, until they got to Cooktown, and one of the crew had said, seen this strange animal, and they've set the dogs after it, and they caught one the next day, and they've asked, like the legendary story, and again, what do you believe? They've asked the Aborigines, in perfect English, what are these things hopping around here with these long tails? And the Aborigines are looking at each other going, kangaroo, which translates to what he say. So that is supposedly what the word kangaroo means, what he say. But what do you believe? I'm believing less and less and less, because you can read 2 accounts of the same thing and there's a different story every time. And I don't know what the story is with this. It's on the road to Kowanyama. I think someone got frustrated with the lawnmower and they've set it in concrete. John Flynn, Alf Traeger, Pedal Radio. What would they be worth these days?
Zillions.
Eh?
Zillions.
Zillions. I've never seen one. Oh well, I have seen one. I've seen about 5 of them in the museum. That's at Cloncurry. Yeah. An early radio of some description. Obviously multi-channel. They can shift all the tune circuits around. Old 2-ways. And there's the Morse keyboard.
So where is this at?
Cloncurry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the last of Birken Wills's campsites. Camp number 119. Because from here, the 4 of them took off to get to the ocean, and they never actually saw the ocean. They got into mangroves and turned around and came back. So that's their last campsite. Again, when the cops are coming down the road, flashing the lights, get the camera out, take a photo. Oop. That's one of my tyre failures. Drove around for more than a month. Things are going tick, 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 tick all the time, and I just thought it was a stone. Had the car serviced, and I took the tyre off, put the spare on, told me about it. I'd never known at all. That's the day I got bogged. That probably took 3/4 of an hour to get out of. I picked up every stone for about 200 metres around. Now, people don't understand when they get in a bog and they're trying to drive away, what they've got to do is they've got to lift the vehicle. You can't just drive forward, you've got to lift it. So you've got to get enough power and traction to be able to get forward momentum and to lift a 1 tonne or 1.5 tonne vehicle, or whatever tonnage you've got, up a very steep ramp, very steep slippery ramp. And I'd gone backwards and forwards all over the place. Now, I never scratched the car. Got within a centimetre of the side of it, never scratched it. Finally got out, turned all 4 tyres blue from heat. Actually got to the point where they have clutches or some mechanism in their diffs that let go, and they just go off like a rattle gun and nothing happens. You've got to turn, I really thought I'd done some damage when the first one happened, and thinking I'm going to have to walk out and get a tow truck and so forth, but you just turn the whole thing off, shut it down, start it up again, and it resets. Took all that time and effort to get out. I was talking to one of my cousins about 6 weeks later, and he said, "Oh, fantastic that they got the diff locks in those things, because they've got a snow switch. They don't call it a diff lock." And I never even thought to use it. So anyway, that all dried out. It was very easy to clean in the end. All went dry, cracked, and they just threw it all out and one vacuum, no problem. Pole position at Bathurst. Hungry Jack's burnt down at Albury. Because the standard thing with my daughter, every time we went past a Hungry Jack's, because Hungry Jack's is always fuming smoke out the chimney, I said, "Hungry Jack's is on fire." And she'd always come back with a comment, so I took all these photos and sent them to her. Finally, one of them burnt down. Now, Western Victoria is full of volcanoes, and that there is just happened to be a perfectly symmetrical view of 3 hills from a distance, and that's a volcano. And that's Shepparton. That's a volcano. That's a locust plague. That's my company car after driving through it. They're all,
They're alive.
yep, no, they're all alive. They're, I'd say, one day before flying. Threadbow. You've got this vast range, 46 degrees in Adelaide. Out of Threadbow, and there's snow, ice. Now, wasn't a explorer. Jack Riley was the man from Snowy River, buried at Corryong in Victoria, near the Murray River. So he did exist. And if you're a Mad Max fan, Silverton was part of the area where they did the filming. That's a replica, it's not one of the real cars. They had 3 cars in the movie, one was wrecked. Don't know where the other 2 are, but that was a replica. Now, I don't know what this guy's problem was. I think it was to do with this building here that was built about 1 metre too high. And he's gone off the deep end. He spent 91 days in jail for contempt of court. He let fly. We'll just get through this. That's what's called a tingle tree. Like you've all heard of jarrah and carry trees. There's a bigger tree called the tingle tree. It's fairly delicate. Like the root system's very delicate, but that's one of the biggest I've seen. Again over in WA. That's on the way to Geraldton. It's been like that. It hasn't changed in 45 years. I first saw that in 1975. I got photos of it 5 times. 5 times I've been around there. Never changed. Still growing. And there's quite a few of them like that. It's just that one's right beside the road. And they've actually put a parking bay there to keep the cars off the road. See things like that, take the opportunity to take a photo. Now, I had 4 accidents. I killed an emu and 2 wallabies and a wheelie bin. Now I hit the wheelie bin with the mirror. I thought I'd miss it, and that come around, it smashed the mirror and it went off like a shotgun. Frightened the crap out of me. And got it fixed at the Subaru dealers the next service. Not a problem. So head office weren't really aware of it. Now this is possibly the biggest red gum tree in Australia. I don't even know where that is. Victoria somewhere. That's at Geelong. They used to make whiskey there. It's all copper. The bottom of that sphere is 2 layer. So what they've done is they've put boiling water in so that they don't overheat the water that's inside there and burn it at all. So there's 1,000 gallons. It's a 1,000-gallon tank. And Australians stopped buying Australian-made whiskey for some strange reason. Okay, Murrumbidgee River in flood, or a floodplain, and this is how a flood should work. That's perfectly clean water. Just the river rises, spreads slowly over the land, doesn't do any damage, saturates the ground, germinates all the red gum trees. Then it just goes back down and all goes out to sea. And that's 230,000 volt power pole with a mobile phone cell site on it and a crane. And there's actually 3 guys up there. You can see 2. They're braver men than I am. That's an AM broadcast station on the Brisbane River near St Lucia. And if you look at the capacity hat on the top of it, it's a Hills hoist. Has a capacity hat. And that was coming down from one of the Victorian snowfields. I was driving along in cloud, got down to the point under the cloud where the rain started dripping. Well, firstly, in the cloud I had visibility of about 5 metres, so I was driving very carefully, and a woman in a Mitsubishi Magna goes through the fog. Never saw her again, but anyway, got to this point and I thought I've got to take a photo of that. Jumped out, took the photo, got wet because the rain is just dripping. It's right at the point where the cloud becomes rain, or rain goes to cloud, whatever. Again, that's gum trees. It's a national park in Victoria over in Gippsland. That's one of my starkest photos, 3 railway lines. That's Western Australia. It's quite a few places because you've got your standard gauge for the Indian Pacific and your original 3'6" rubber lines for the original trains. All the weak trains still use it. And that one is the end. Central Queensland, somewhere between Hughenden and Muttaburra. That's dinosaur country. But that there is as flat can be. There are trees barely visible over here. If you've got a lot of imagination, you might see a dark line over there. So there were trees. The thing I found in all the driving I've ever done, brown soil and black soil never corrugates. Sand will corrugate all the time. And when I first went around Western Australia in 1975, there were a lot of cattle grids. And everyone would go flat out up to the point where they needed to jump on the brakes. They compress the springs at the front of the car and they make the corrugations worse. Then they hit the grid and go over it. And what they were doing back then, there were a lot of bores and watering points for cattle beside the roads. So there was so many cattle that got hit, run over by cars and trucks, and they've obviously capped all the bores and shifted them all inland away from the roads. So that's the final photo.
Questions for Graeme?
Yes. Are we going to have to get beds? Because we might get locked in.
Have you calculated how many kilometres you've driven?
On this job, 531,000 k in 6.5 years, and $68,000 worth of petrol. Because we had to keep receipts, and I had an Excel spreadsheet. I estimate I've done 1.8 million k in 48 years, driving around Australia. I'm deaf in my right ear because of all the driving, because the first 3 cars I had, no air conditioning, so I always drove around with the windows down. And you get a car like a Cortina. I had that Cortina, the first car I had. They become very noisy at 80 kilometres an hour, and a lot of the noise comes from the wing mirror. And at 80, you get the air doing that, and it sends you deaf. Now, I remember once about 1976 or 7, I went from Mount Isa across to Tennant Creek, and I got out at the petrol station there, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, I'm deaf, I can't hear anything. And then all my hearing came back about 20 minutes later. And because when you're 19 or 20 years old, you're bulletproof. You don't take advice from any of the old people that say you'll go deaf. And I've gone deaf in my right ear. So I have to listen with this ear. So if I ever turn like this, that's what I'm doing. It's because I'm deaf. So what else was there? A lot of things happened on the job. 100% of Vodafone signal went through all the sites. There's 28,000 poles or cell sites. 40% of Optus and about 10% of Telstra went through their sites. 3 drivers. Fixed per diem. We got $210 a day or a night. We had to just find our own accommodation, our own food, and we had to use it, as in we weren't really allowed to be sleeping in a tent, which I did a couple of times because there's no other accommodation. So I got very good at finding motels. One motel in Ringwood in Victoria. I was there one Friday night, and the AFL football's on. I had the volume up. It's getting pretty exciting. And then quarter time or half time came, because I could also hear other people yelling, and I thought they were watching the footy as well. I turned the volume down when quarter time, half time, whatever came on, and I realised there's a fight going on downstairs in one of the rooms, and someone set fire to the room. And they've got the pillows and the sheets, blankets and the mattress, and they've thrown the whole lot out on the hedge right beside my company car. So, but what do you do? And the operators of the motel came over. They never called the fire brigade or anything. Never called the cops. Didn't want any trouble. So what else happened? There's dozens of things that happened. Now, the three types of driving, like I started off saying about efficient driving. I tried to become very efficient at what I was doing. Now, the city centres, as I've said, you do 2 a year, if you're lucky.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
90% of what you do, or I did, was suburban driving. Now, the suburban roads are actually quite rough. But most people are not realising that or understanding that, because you don't drive far in a suburb until you get onto an arterial road. The arterial roads get smoother. But because you're only doing 40, 50 kilometres an hour around the suburbs, you're not aware of just how rough they are. Brisbane's the place for what they call traffic calming. They've got these huge, not median strips, but concrete structures that make you chicanes, and that sort of. You can't hop over them. Even a four-wheel drive wouldn't hop over them, so you've got to go around them slowly. And I believe it's better to just do a left-right rather than do like a speed bump where you're forever speeding up, slowing down. Now, GPSs, we've already gone through that about the pine trees. Now, Openstreetmap.org. You ever use Openstreetmap? I put 32,000 kilometres of traces in that. Paper maps were A0 format. Now, in my mind, I could hold about three things that I could do with the driving. Like, I would pull over, look at my map, decide where I was going to go. I couldn't do any more than three. I couldn't hold more than three things in my mind, as in go left, go through that intersection, go left again. Something like that. Then I'd have to pull over, but then I would mark up where I'd been. And this was all leading up to this GPS with 10,000 points. Because we believed that if we could have this thing that would set the path, that we would just follow this path, wouldn't have to pull over, wouldn't have to mark up maps and so forth. Didn't work. Now, another thing that happened in Tumut, in Snowy Mountains, driving around Tumut. Well, firstly, I'll go back a bit. I thought to myself, if I get one of these little portable voice recorders, like a little note taker, solid state thing, I'd be able to talk my memoirs into this thing, and then have a good record of what I've done and so forth. And I bought one over in Perth, and I used it, and the recording is still on there. And I started the thing off, and I've gone. About 10 seconds later, I've turned it off. Never did it again. Because when you're driving, your brain is processing something that's moving. Everything around you is moving. Like, you're moving, it's not, but you get the perception that it's moving. Now, what my brain does, and I've had arguments with other people that say this is irrelevant, I'm looking for movement within movement. Like a dog, kangaroo, cows, anything that's moving. It's a threat. It's a danger to you, and you got to be able to recognise that. And your brain spends so much time processing that you can't concentrate on anything else. Now the other thing, leading up to it, in the town of Tumut in the Snowy Mountains, I'm driving around, and I'm thinking of Mariah Carey. And I'm thinking, why am I thinking of her? I couldn't care less for her music. My daughter used to listen to her music, and it happened 3 or 4 times, and I'm thinking, why am I thinking of Mariah Carey? There's a Carey Street, and I've seen the sign, and it's come up on the GPS. And then I started to realise that all these road signs and names are a trigger. So you see the word Cochrane Street. I know a guy called Peter Cochrane. I start thinking about him. And then, like, these triggers set your mind off, which is part of the reason why I couldn't concentrate to do my memoirs. So, moving right along, 10 days on, 4 days off, 260 motel nights a year. There was a motel east of Perth, up in the bush, where it was so quiet I could hear the person in the next room turning the page of a magazine and eating biscuits. That's how quiet it was. And in return, they got to hear me snore. The motel in Ringwood, where having a fight in a place called Fire, driving technique. Now, driving on the left-hand side of the road, everyone says you do more left turns than you do right turns, and that's probably true. And I've thought, what is the ratio? How many more left turns do you do than right turns? Because I didn't know, and I thought it'd have to be 10. And then when I started to count things up, it's somewhere between 4 and 5. You probably 4 or 5 times more left turns than you do right turns. And the Melbourne trams, you don't drive past a stationary tram, in case you just don't know that, because the tram drivers will rip your ears off. You just cannot go past a stationary tram. I had a guy on a bicycle confront me about it. I didn't read the rules. I read the rules in 1972 when I got my licence. Never looked at a set of rules since. So that's more or less it. We could be here all night, otherwise I could go on and on and on.
Fantastic. We'll show our appreciation, everyone.